Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kopi Chat with me, your host Waylene. Today, I have a great show for you. Lots of good material. Might be the best one yet, and I hope that you are ready. All right, let's jump right into it. So in Singapore, a study has been published. Fascinating study. Study finds that seniors and public flat dwellers more vulnerable to fake news. So the older and poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are to fake news. That's the conclusion here. It doesn't say it that way, but I think you know um, the implications, right? It's not too much for me to say that, right? Will I get cancelled? Probably not. Probably not. Um, with 2/3 of respondents failing experiment, and if there's one thing that Singaporeans don't like is to fail their exams. So this is definitely very upsetting, very upsetting. Right? You might notice that this is from 2020. Yes. There's a follow-up study, which is why I looked this up. But let me just skim it really quickly. So there's an Institute of Policy Studies that in Singapore, staffed by I think it's government officials, company, like directors of multinational corporations and NGO people, and they do these studies from time to time to understand the public. And so the study found that most Singaporeans are unable to detect false fake news. These groups are more likely to fall prey to the groups that are more likely to fall prey to misinformation. Yeah, seniors and those who trust non-traditional sources of news. And even then, no one, not even the most informationally savvy people, is immune from fake news. So fake news, I think the key takeaway is that it's a really big problem and everyone's susceptible to it. Okay, yeah, see, even with the most informationally savvy group of respondents, a significant 46.9% of those still wrongly trusted the fake article. So they constructed the fake article, presented to people, asked them to rate, I guess, the truthfulness of it, and they found that even for people who are supposed to know, most savvy, nearly half of people still drew the wrong conclusion. So big deal, right? And then it turns out that just this week there was a follow up. Same study, different parts. So it's been quite a while. That one was like 2 years ago, and now 2 years on, Singaporeans too passive over fake news. More education needed in calling out falsehoods, according to the same IPS study, or at least in the same institution, the IPS. This study found that people generally do not act to stop the spread of falsehood among social networks. This is because they believe they would hurt their relationship or social standing if they were wrong. Yes, and I can, this is plain to see. Nobody wants to be the one who calls out the fake news, but to be wrong, on the other hand, and everybody mocks them, ridicules them for being wrong. Also, like if you have a family WhatsApp group, and a lot of people have that, and you have like your parents or your uncles and aunties who are sharing, forwarded messages, praising, say, China and, criticizing the United States. Like, this is a very common thing. Okay, everybody's seen it. Don't look at me like that. So it happens all the time. But you don't want to criticize them because, they're your parents or your uncle, your favorite uncle or favorite auntie, or at worst your grandparents, and then they're gonna criticize you and tell you that you don't know anything, you young punk, just shut up and listen, and maybe they'll not talk to you, and that will really screw things up, right? So nobody wants to be in that position. This is just not that kind of culture. I mean, I reckon that if you were, so I noticed in Germany, where I spent a year, it was very common to have a robust discussion about issues of the day, and if you show that your position is right, well, it makes you feel good, and also people respect that. Respect that you've got a different opinion that you can justify, and especially if it's true, you come across as more educated. But it's not the way things work here. Now, also, a report found that some felt the fake news problem was not serious or thought it was government or the media's problem, and this is exactly true. Now, if you're not from Singapore, I can tell you it's exactly true. In a way, the authorities in Singapore are victim of their own success. People in Singapore have high trust in the authorities, and traditionally, the authorities have been very happy to hold that trust in order to govern and do a good job for people. However, in 2022, the situation is rather different. Now, in decades past, people trust the authorities. Authorities control the media, the information sources, and everybody can proceed as per normal. But today, there's so many sources of information that traditional media can't keep up. No, I make it a point to check the traditional media because I don't want people to question my sources. So I'll try to show you news that's reported on traditional media. But there are so many sources right now, and if you're not familiar with them, you may be susceptible to confirmation bias. If some unknown source says something that you agree with, you trust it, and later on it tells you something else totally different on a different topic, and you could trust it again, and that would be totally wrong, and that might be very, very problematic. So, but what to do, right? Because all these exist, and people are free to access it. So authorities have a difficult time to combat all that because they don't even know what you don't even know what is out there that you need to counter, right? So people, the authorities are not able to counter all of that, and people are not seeing the seriousness of the issue. They think it's not serious, and they think it's government problem, government or media's problem. Government or the media, who we have trusted so far up to this point, should take care of it. So this is really tricky though, because yes, the first phase study released in 2020, yes. So what we can see from these findings is that for those who want to play a part against fake news, there is a hesitancy, reluctance, and fear. And yes, fear can be attributed to a loss of face or social capital. It's just a fancy way to say, if you know this, then you know this, paise. So nobody wants to be paise. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. Let's see, anything else? So yes, media literacy campaigns. So study concludes that there needs to be more campaigns to educate people on how to tell what's fake news. And here's where I want to share my controversial opinion, if you will, and that is authorities in Singapore are caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, if they do nothing, and we know this for a fact, there are plenty of WhatsApp messages being forwarded that are not good for Singapore's interests. For instance, I think there was actually a member of the international, IPS organization who was turned by Chinese intelligence to spy on behalf of Chinese intelligence on the United States. So Chinese intelligence got a Singaporean to spy on the US. And how did they do that? Well, we might, guess that at least part of it was the ample amount of information that they were spreading about, the virtues of the CCP and, the evils of the United States, and all of which is floating around all the time now. I can see it on WhatsApp pretty frequently, and I reckon that you could too if you spoke to your family, friends, relatives. And this is a problem because it undermines trust in your own government and encourages you to act on behalf of another government. So that's a problem. And if no action is taken, this trend will continue when it's unfavorable. Now, on the other hand, if action is taken and you do these media literacy campaigns, well, what happens? Well, what happens is that if you're successful and you train up a group of people who are critical thinkers and who know how to analyze, know how to read, media, they'll be more resistant to this propaganda, and maybe they'll help you, strengthen the propaganda resistance of your population. But they will also resist your own internal propaganda. That's the problem. And don't get mad at me, dear viewer. I know you may think like, hey, what are you talking about? Are you saying that, are you saying that my news is propaganda? I'm saying that there's propaganda from all sides. Every country does propaganda on her own citizens. It's just true. Which is why you would often hear, whatever country you're from, any country you're from, with the exception of maybe North Korea, people say, they don't really trust the government that much. They don't trust it completely. There'll be some amount of skepticism, even in Singapore. You trust the government, sure, but it won't do every single thing. Like some things you just don't want to do, right? No matter how it's told to you, it's like good or bad. If you're a smoker and the government says don't smoke, you might still smoke simply because you like it, you're addicted, and you disagree that it's that risky to you, right? So it is simply the case that governments say things and people don't always believe it. I think it's plain enough that you can't. There's nobody who would disagree with that. Nobody reasonable disagree with that. So the problem is, yeah, then the critical thinking people will make it more difficult for the government to any authorities to get their message across as well. So it's rock and a hard place. Either you do nothing, and then foreign intelligence agencies, foreign interests, gain a foothold in your society, or you do something. And if you do something, it can either not work at all, in which case you're stuck at the original problem, that is foreign interference, or it works. And then the domestic propaganda doesn't work. So it's a difficult spot. Okay, moving on. Now, one thing we cannot avoid is the Ukraine conflict. So, starting today, sporting sanctions are coming. This will definitely hurt that tyrant Putin. Sporting sanctions. Well, what I mean by sporting sanctions is banning Russia from participating in things like the Olympics. If you watch football, then the UEFA Champions League, UEFA Europa League. It could be the for basketball, all kinds of sports. Just stopping Russian athletes from competing in these international events, international tournaments. And I think the proposal is really sound. I think it's a great idea because sport is one of those things that is very impactful for people. That is, you see it on TV. A lot of people's lives revolve around the sports that they follow. Their teams, their stars, whether they're in the UFC or the MMA or football or basketball. Like all of these are intertwined with people's lives. And if their favorite, team or athlete cannot compete internationally in the, most important tournament of the summer, of the next year, of this year, of the 4 years from now, then that's a huge deal. So it could potentially be very effective. However, unfortunately, without even scrolling down, I can tell you that the UEFA Champions League, the football UEFA Champions League, and FIFA, organizer of the World Cup, have indicated that, we're going to move the UEFA Champions League final out of Russia, but didn't say anything about like banning Russian teams from participating. And World Cup will force Russia to compete under a different name and not play the national anthem, but it can still compete. So it sounds overall like it's been a letdown. FIFA's really been a letdown on this, because I also would agree that they should be banned. That would be something that people really see on television screens, like the absence. Like they'll be upset, and it would certainly. Overall, it doesn't cost that much. Like even as a Russian, if you kind of watch the sports, yes, you can do something else, but you won't be happy, and that's the point. And you won't affect your income. It won't affect your salary unless you're the athlete or the football star. But that is really minimizing the impact. Well, minimizing the impact on livelihoods while maximizing impact on people's awareness. And that's not being done. That's too bad. Here's an interesting piece of commentary. Somebody called Bo Ziyue commented that Russia's Ukraine invasion is very awkward for China. Russia's military operations will challenge China's ability to maintain good relations with Moscow and preserve its long-held position that countries must respect each other's territorial sovereignty. I don't see why that's the case, and I have already read the article below. So China can maintain good relations with Moscow, which is what they're doing now, and they also have stated publicly that through their foreign ministry that countries must respect each other's territorial sovereignty, which they also maintain for Taiwan. They say that Taiwan's our province, and you must respect, the territorial sovereignty of China. So that's exactly what they're doing. So I don't understand why there's a claim that they can't do both. And even though I read the article, it does not really do justice to the argument. See, look at this. Reality is China's options are limited. She cannot openly back Putin's invasion of another sovereign country. Yes. Okay. That means you wouldn't want to. And they have not done so, right? Right. But neither can she openly condemn his friend and ally. Right. Also true. Because, Vladimir Putin attended the Winter Olympics personally. So what does China do? Well, China states that, let's have restraint amid the tensions and even the fighting, and refrain from condemning its friend and ally. That's exactly what China's done. So why can't that be done? Why can't that be done? So in a call, with Russian counterpart last Thursday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi highlighted that China respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries. Exactly. So that's exactly what they're doing, and there actually is no problem. Sitting on a fence does no good for China. Why not? China must do more if it doesn't want to be seen as an enabler for Russia. Why does China have to do more? What's the drawback of being, seen as an enabler? And who is making that accusation, right? But it sounds like China is exhausting how much it can urge Russia to exercise restraint and get back to the negotiating table. Well, why does China need to urge Russia to exercise restraint and get back to the negotiating table? On Friday, Xi indicated his support for Russia and Ukraine to resolve the issue through negotiation. Yes, but if they don't go back to the negotiating table, why is that a big deal for China? So nowhere is it explained here. See, perhaps China is losing patience. Xi did not say that China understood Russia's security concerns. China appears determined not to take Russia's position as its own. Yes, that's right. And why would China take Russia's position? No one can say what China's position is, but sitting on the fence and adopting wait-and-see attitude is hardly behavior befitting a responsible global power. Why not? See, I don't understand. It seems to be like making an issue out of absolutely nothing. Much is at stake when anything that upsets China's economy creates trouble later in the year when the National People's Congress will be held. Why would that be an issue? The best course of action for Xi may be to bring Putin to the negotiating table. Why? So here, Professor Bo Zhiyue is the founder and president of Bo Zhiyue China Institute, a consulting firm providing services to government leaders and CEOs of multinational corporations, and an author on China's elite politics. He is an author. I'll grant you that. Sorry, Mr. Professor Dr. Bo, you haven't really made your case. Why is it awkward? They are in a great position, right? Russia turns to China. If Russia cannot sell gas to Europe, right, Russia will sell to China. And China will be happy to buy what it can. It can't buy infinite amounts of gas, but it'll buy what it can because China has growing energy needs, and they'll keep growing, continue to grow. If Russia can't, sell it to Europe for a nice, euro premium, maybe they'll sell it to China for a slightly cheaper price. China will take it, and they can't take that much. Russia will sell the rest elsewhere. China won't break the bank to help Russia out here. And then if Russia Russia's elites need help with banking, their companies need banking, well, will China be a source of funds of investors? Yes, certainly, absolutely. Why not? Right? Because China's already doing their Belt and Road Initiative. They're looking for investments all around the world because they have so much money, they need to generate returns on it. Why wouldn't they put it into Russia, provided they get a good return, provided they get a good deal? Yes. So there's nothing awkward here. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see it. Okay, moving on very quickly. Google temporarily disables Google Maps live traffic data in Ukraine. Now, this is a funny one. I'll bet you didn't know this about the going-ons in Ukraine. So what happened was that some people had seen let's see, a professor at California's Middlesbrough Institute. He said Google Maps helped him track a traffic jam that was actually Russian movement towards the border hours before the invasion. So that was pretty funny. So he was observing the Russian movements, and it just came across as a traffic jam. And I think Google does not want to be involved with helping either side track military, troop movements, vehicle movements. So they're gonna just shut down the live traffic part. You can still use Google for turn-by-turn navigation. It says here. And look, I even found a video of Russian troops using turn-by-turn navigation. Even tells them when to stop for traffic. Look at that. Polite invasion. But seriously, probably not. Because the military vehicles would definitely have their own GPS systems, right? Because you wouldn't want to use a commercial grade navigation system, use a military grade one. So this is funny, but probably not actually related to the, like actual navigation for the troops. Okay, moving on. Now, I came across this website called the Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting Organization. It has some interesting articles about various news issues, and the one that caught my attention was this about Ukraine. Now it appears to be no holds barred. Now let me show you what I mean by no holds barred. The West wants here are the things you really need to know about Ukraine. The West wants investor-friendly policies in Ukraine, and this has been demonstrably true. In 2014 or so, 2013, after early steps to integrate the West, the president at the time, Viktor Yanukovych, stopped negotiating with the IMF about a series of economic reforms to make the country more attractive to investors. This minimum wage, reforming and reducing health education sectors, and cutting natural gas subsidies, which are expensive. So these are all things that are good for people, right? People like to have minimum wage to ensure a minimum standard of living. They like to have well-funded health and education sectors, and they like to have natural gas subsidies. But it's typical of the IMF to be against that, because they want these industries to be more free, open to foreign investment, make it more competitive, turn a profit, and that's their whole thing. Now, President Yanukovych at the time turned against these changes and ended trade integration talks with EU. He restarted economic negotiations with Russia, and Russia offered, I think, 15 billion euros in economic assistance to Ukraine. Now, a few months after that, Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown. After the 2014 coup of overthrowing Viktor Yanukovych, the new government quickly restarted the EU deal. After cutting heat subsidies in half, it got a 27 billion commitment from the IMF. The IMF's goals still include reducing the role of the state and vested interest in the economy in order to attract more foreign capital. Now, one might say, well, isn't that a good thing? Well, what happened was not good in the end. I mean, we saw that. Now, I wouldn't say that that's the only reason, right, that Viktor Yanukovych decided to talk to Russia and that led to his overthrow. I mean, I don't know if I go that far, but it is true that the timeline works out that way. He started talking to Russia, and then soon after that, he was overthrown. And then, here, the U.S. helped overthrow Ukraine's elected president. The article makes the claim, though, right? During the tug of war between the U.S. and Russia, the Americans were engaged in a destabilizing campaign against the Yanukovych government. As turmoil engulfed the country in the lead up to 2014, the U.S. was fueling anti-government sentiment through mechanisms like U.S. aid and the NED, just as they had done in 2004. This is a link. There's a link here to an article from The Guardian, UK newspaper, describing this, what went on. I won't click on it here, but suffice to say, you can follow this if you like. I'll put this into the show notes, so in the description, so you can click on it, fair.org, and read the full thing on your own. Now, what linked to this claim that U.S. helped overthrow Ukraine's elected government was that U.S. officials were caught picking the new government. So there's a claim here, and there's plenty of reporting about what these organizations like USAID and NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, do, including on websites like super trustworthy websites like Washington Post, trustworthy at least, for some of these issues. And let's see. U.S. officials were caught picking the new government. Yes, you can see a screenshot here of BBC. So the BBC reported on the issue, and you can see there are many sources down here where report the contents of a phone call that took place between who was then the Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador to the Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat. So they had a good conversation. Transcript is here. There's some commentary by Mr. Jonathan Marcus, who's the journalist writing this up. He explains the context as well as the figures that they're referring to, and so they're discussing about who to support, who to bring into some calls, some meetings. Who will lead, who will follow, and the man that they wanted, Vitaly Klitschko. He's actually current mayor of Kiev during this crisis. And so you can see that it sounds to me like at least some of the opposition characters have very close ties to the U.S. State Department. And you can see during this call, the one that really got the most attention was Victoria Nuland in a fit of frustration because she has to talk to the EU to get her EU counterparts to agree, and she had to swear, fuck the EU, because so frustrated. So here, I think it's pretty clear cut, undeniable, and the United States State Department also did not deny that the call took place, only to accuse the Russians of leaking the contents of the call. So it really, casts a different light on what's going on in Ukraine, knowing that the Ukrainian politicians have been perhaps, being too close to Washington, being manipulated all along. And to be fair, I'm not saying that Russia doesn't do that. Everybody does that. But to present, the issue as, the current conflict as one where, Russia is purely the aggressor and they are the ones who've been meddling, trying to meddle in Ukraine is incorrect. Both sides, United States and Russia, have been trying to meddle in Ukraine. And obviously the United States got the job done, and that threatened Russia, and they never dealt with the issue properly, which is contributing factor to where we are today. Okay, moving on though. Look at this. Singapore, very unusual for me to see this. Singapore to impose sanctions on Russia, including export controls and certain bank transactions. So export controls on things that can be used as weapons, they said, and certain bank transactions relating to Russian banks, according to Foreign Minister Mr. Vivian Balakrishnan. Now, Mr. Balakrishnan says Singapore will impose sanctions on Russia in concert with other like-minded countries, citing the unprecedented gravity of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. He says, instead of choosing sides, we uphold principles. Consequently, when we conduct our foreign policy in a coherent and consistent manner, we also become reliable partners for those who operate the same principles. Now here I want to share something. Let us turn the clock back and turn our attention to 2014, when the US invokes Iraq's defense in legal justification of Syria strikes. So the US launched airstrikes on Syria, specifically towards, I think, ISIS and some other organization called Khorasan, named here in Syria. The justification given was that Iraq was under threat. Iraq was being attacked by these organizations coming over the border from Syria. So their legal justification is Iraq asked for assistance, Iraq asked for help. Let's see. Yes, the Islamic State, the American government, citing a September 20th letter from Iraq's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ibrahim al-Jafari, to UN, complaining that the Islamic State was attacking Iraq from its havens and saying that it had requested United States assistance in defending itself. Therefore, it is legal. So this is exactly, you know where I'm going with this. This is exactly the same justification that Vladimir Putin gave when invading Ukraine. Justification being that the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, which his government recognizes as independent countries, were being attacked by Ukraine. Which they were. Nobody argues that they weren't. Nobody argues the other side. They were, because Ukraine saw them as rebel provinces trying to break away, under threat. They were taken over by insurgents. So they have to clear out the insurgents, right? Take over, assert their control over the country. But not to Russia. Russia would say, no, these are independent republics and you can't attack them. They're a different country. And so when asked for help by Donetsk and Lugansk, Russia decided, okay, great, I'll help. Which is so it's the same justification. So you would expect that, there should be an equal, an opposite condemnation for the unilateral, either, support both ways for US action in Syria and Russian action in the Donbass, or condemnation both ways, condemnation for the Donbass and condemnation for these actions in Syria. But what we observe, and I've done the Google search to verify this, is that nothing is said about the situation in Syria, which was granted in 2014, that's like 8 years ago. But now sanctions are imposed on Russia. So, I don't know. I don't really know what the principles are. To be honest. It is true that Singapore has rarely acted to impose sanctions. Yes, that's true. So, I just wanted to point that out. I have no other comment on that. Singapore can do what she wants. Now, here's something you definitely have not heard before. In 2020, the Washington Post published this article saying 6 years and $20 billion in Russian investment later, Crimeans are happy with Russian annexation. Our surveys show high levels of trust in Putin, though lower compared to 2014. Blah, 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 blah. In Crimea itself, the annexation was popular, especially among Crimea's large population of older ethnic Russians. Crimeans favored rejoining Russia. Yeah, so remarkable, isn't it, that what we're told, is this horrible war of aggression, this annexation, destroying a country piece by piece, leads to this outcome, which is that the people there are really happy about it. And I've heard from someone I trust that there are some Ukrainians who don't really care that Crimea is gone, because it was always filled with Russian-speaking people, which is exactly what is true. Like over 95% of the people there speak Russian as a first language. It's somewhere in this article, although I cannot remember where. So sorry about that. But yeah, this is something you definitely do not hear about it, and it adds to the earlier message that there's a lot of foreign power meddling in Ukraine. Politicians were supported, were withdrawn, overthrown. There was a coup, and then people in the Donbass region, meaning Donetsk and Lugansk, they were very unhappy and they were rebelled. And then Crimea, they were actually, they even were mostly Russian speaking, identified with Russia. So it's a very strange situation, not all clear cut. Now, moving on. Now something very clear cut. Russian central bank apparently has ordered a block on foreign clients' bids to sell Russian securities. So what this means is that the Russian central bank has ordered professional stock market participants to suspend the execution of all orders by foreign entities and individuals to sell Russian securities from Monday morning. So bidding today, in fact, it's probably started already. Foreign non-Russian entities may not sell Russian securities. You just can't. And this might actually be the biggest own goal yet to, in this Ukraine conflict, because this is exactly the kind of thing that foreign countries want to do to Russia, but they couldn't possibly do, but Russia did to itself. That is to scare foreigners into withdrawing investments from Russia, staying away from Russia, because if you invest in Russia, you may not be able to take your money out. Of course, it's a terrifying prospect. So Russia has definitely shot itself in the foot just with this action. Huge surprise, because it seems like a very irrational thing, maybe one done out of anxiety and fear. In fact, piling on the fear would be, now Japan is joining US and EU in a SWIFT ban on Russian banks, so they wouldn't be able to do interbank transfers through this SWIFT international system. And I respect that. I think Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, new guy on the job, but very assertive and principled. I don't know yet if this will be ultimately great for Japan, but he's not afraid to get started. However, I did look up, what this SWIFT ban entails, because the question here is, will it involve oil and natural gas, because that is Russia's biggest export and a huge part of the Russian economy. Now, apparently, according to, and I couldn't find any actual news in the usual mainstream media outlets, so I had to look into something like this website, S&P Global Platts, which is oil and gas industry news website. Now, it reports here, although the details have not yet been released, it appears to be narrowly targeted and should not directly affect Russian commodity exports, says the head of global oil analytics at S&P Global, Rick Joswick. So the details on the sanctions have not been unveiled, and some reports suggest that it will include the oil and gas, whilst Rick Joswick here would say that it probably would not be, appears to be narrowly targeted. So if it's not, this would be the most, I wouldn't, oh, my cat's meowing. This would be the most toothless sanctions you may have ever heard of, because the whole point, the one thing that can really hit the Russian economy and to really affect, a lot of change, a lot of may have the most impact, like have the most potential to reverse course, on make Putin reverse course on the conflict, would be punishment on the oil and gas sector. But that may not actually take place. Well, we may still need to wait until maybe another week or so to find out. And it's very unfortunate because we always knew that Russia had this weakness, but Europe and the United States did not seem to be adequately prepared to deal with that reality, that is like stocking up oil, or finding alternative sources, finding alternative energy sources, and thus put themselves in an impossible situation where you cannot punish Russia on this, because to punish Russia on this is to pay a higher price for oil, which is unbearable. But domestically speaking, in all their respective countries, leaders will be punished at the polls, right? So that's too bad. That's really unfortunate. Okay, moving on though. Here's a piece on the Jakarta Post, a sustainable feminist recovery. It looks like a stock standard feminist piece. As the world moves ahead to mark International Women's Day, the clock on women's rights is moving backwards. All of us are paying the price. And if you read it, it's totally taking the position that women are suffering, more than others. They're always the first to lose out in any crisis. We must look to the future. Sustainable equal recovery for all is only possible if it is a feminist recovery. So you would think, oh wow, this is really very strongly worded feminist, advocacy for coming from a newspaper called the Jakarta Post, because you wouldn't expect an Indonesian newspaper to, have such a strongly worded editorial on feminism. So who exactly is responsible for this? Can't be an Indonesian. No, it doesn't seem to be that way. So it says it's Antonio Guterres speaking from New York. And you think, I wonder who that is. Then you scroll down a little, and then you see, writer's Secretary General of the United Nations. Oh, did you know that? If you didn't know that, that's okay, because I didn't know it at first glance either. It took me a while to remember that Antonio Guterres is Secretary General of the United Nations. In fact, can you remember what Antonio Guterres looks like? What his face looks like? You can't? Because I draw a blank as well. I have no idea what he looks like. And that's a very stark difference from if you just think back to Mr. Kofi Annan. You remember Kofi Annan? This black gentleman, very distinguished looking, calm voice, voice of reason in the international diplomacy. I remember him, even though he was so long ago when I was a child growing up. He was always on TV, always respected, and I can't remember a single, Secretary General of the United Nations since then, what they look like, what they achieve. In fact, I can't really remember what Kofi Annan accomplished either, but I know that he was respected. That what came through very, very clearly during his tenure. And Antonio Guterres, isn't it remarkable that rather than in this time, of the Ukraine conflict, we don't know what he said, we don't know what he thinks. It doesn't appear that anybody cares or knows what he thinks. And he's just writing about a feminist recovery in a time of what some call like the greatest military crisis since World War II. It's remarkable. The world's a changed place. Being United Nations Secretary General is not what it was before. Okay, moving on to something else. Yeah. So, in Singapore, the Court of Appeal dismisses challenges to Section 377A, a law criminalizing sex between men, which is due to stay now. So, there were 3 lawsuits filed to challenge this a law called Section 377A, criminalizing sex between men, yes. But they were all failed. They were all dismissed. And in a 152-page written judgment delivered by Chief Justice Sundaresh Menon, the Court of Appeal stressed that the appeals are not about whether the law should be retained or repealed, as this was a matter beyond our remit, which is exactly correct. Because the courts are not meant to decide if a law should be retained or repealed. The courts are meant to interpret the law, to say, how does this law apply to this crime that was committed or this case that is before us, right? And so the Chief Justice is right on that. I agree with him. Nor are they about the moral worth of gay individuals, not about the fundamental nature of sexual orientation. It's well beyond the purview of the courts. Yes. So why is this notable? Well, I think it's because it reiterates here the Court of Appeal held that the entirety of this law is unenforceable unless and until the Attorney General of the day provides clear notice that he, in his capacity as public prosecutor, intends to reassert his right to enforce the law by way of prosecution and will no longer abide by representations made by the then Attorney General in 2018 as to the prosecutorial policy that applies to certain conduct. Which is an extremely legalistic way of saying that, hey, the previous guy said in 2018 that he's not going to enforce this law. So unless the current guy says, I'm going to reassert my right to enforce the law, otherwise, it's unenforceable and we don't have to talk about it. It's unnecessary. We don't have to talk about it. So that is the real thing here. The news here lays it out as though it's a big defeat, a big setback. The law is going to stay, but I think it's really more positive than that. In that, let's see. The Attorney General's Chamber's lawyers reiterated the government's position that the police will not take proactive action to enforce this law. And that is the real key takeaway here, that in 2018, the Attorney General stated that we will not take action on this law, and today, the same has been repeated. So, to me, I think this is a big plus, and the fact that the law has not been repealed might even be secondary, because there are laws, I know that even in London, There's a law that you can't walk around in a suit of armor in front of parliament or something, or you can't have like rotting fish out, at a certain time or place. That there are these very strange laws that have never been repealed, but nobody enforces them. So I understand that this is highly symbolic and very important to many people, and I do not want to come across as flippant and downplay the importance of it. You see here there's an advocacy organization called Pink.SG who is profoundly disappointed by the court's decision, and I understand that sentiment, although I think the more important thing is that to note that the government is not going to prosecute this law. It's clear that Pink.SG is more disappointed by the symbolism, that is, the symbolic victory was not gained, and I understand that, but I think the reality that the government's going to just ignore it, and that's the more important thing. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Speaking of social changes, Indonesia's new guidelines for quieter mosques spark controversy, and that is a kind of a funny thing. So, okay, get this. There is now a new rule that says, amends guidelines that date back to 1978. So for the first time, a volume limit for loudspeakers, for the call to prayer and sermons, will be set at 100 decibels. And there's also a rule that your sound quality must not suck. It is 2022. It is no longer acceptable for your sound quality to suck. Your sound quality must be good or not discordant. So no feedback, no Jimi Hendrix stuff going on. Okay? Just good audio. And please, do the Quranic recitals in 10 minutes. Don't go over that. Don't go previously 15 minutes, now 10 minutes, please. So, this sounds like we could call this like the good neighbor guidelines, and I think that would be exactly right. I grew up in Malaysia, and so I'm very familiar with the call to prayer, the muezzin, and yeah, it's pretty loud. It's not the worst thing in the world. No. If I'm in the right frame of mind, I find it very peaceful. I find it very puts me in a contemplative mood. But certainly I wouldn't want to live next to the mosque, because it would be loud, Nothing about which religion or the contents of, the voice of what they say, but it's just volume. And so this is a huge thing. I think it's a big deal. Now, not because of the actual specifics of the guidelines, but because of the symbolism of it. Now I'm talking about the symbolism. What symbolized here is that such guideline changes only take place when a society is at ease with itself and comfortable that you can make these changes without incurring the wrath, like extreme reactions of people who feel under threat, who feel their religion undermined. I think that's a precondition for such a thing to be implemented. And what it tells you is that Indonesia is in that place now. Indonesia is a country where the people as a whole are, at ease, confident, at ease with themselves. And I feel like I get to practice my religion. I get to be who I am. I get to pursue the life that I want. Also, let's just turn down the volume a bit, because the neighbors have been complaining. That's where they are, and that's great. Symbolically, as symbolism goes, at least practical, but also it symbolizes something, and that I think is noteworthy, praiseworthy, and we should take note of that. So that's what I want to say. I have exhausted all the material that I prepared for today. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, I hope that gave you something to think about, give you a new way of thinking, open your eyes to different perspectives, and just have a good time, just have a good time. And then once again, thank you very much for joining me today. Always happy to be here, talk to you. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the show. Don't do it. No obligation. Never do anything under a sense of obligation. It's just not nice. But subscribe with no obligation. All right. Thank you, and have a great day. Talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.